Well, junior doctors had 11%, so that was a inflation-busting pay rise two to 3 years ago. And some of your viewers will remember the spat with Jeremy Hunt over that. We're sort of almost talking about three different things here, Liam. We've got junior doctors, we've got GPs, and we've got consultants. So there are sort of three different categories that it needs to be sort of boiled down, and you do need to look at them independently. So just leave junior doctors aside for the minute. If you look at GPs, go back to 2004, and New Labour gave GPs a 60% pay increase. And at the time, the relationship between GPs and the NHS was very much about the internal market, and GPs effectively contract themselves to the NHS. It's almost a privatised system. And GPs at the time were told that for a 6% reduction in their new pay, which was about £100,000 a year for a partner, for a 6% reduction, so £6,000 would be the punishment to stop out of hours and doing their own weekend surgeries. So what did all the GPs do? Because they've been given 60% increase, they said, you know what, we're going to drop the out of hours stuff. We're not going to do the out of hours, we're not going to do the Saturday morning. And so the consequence of that, every time GPs let the NHS down, the consequence of that is increased waiting lists in accident and emergency. And that's happening right now. Patients are frustrated, they're scared, they can't get a GP, so they are going into A&E. And the NHS has always been required to pick up the slack from GPs. So that is one issue. And currently, GPs are looking to have more money back again, to go back to the situation pre-2004 when they did their own on-call. And by the way, the consequence of not doing their own on-call and their own weekends was that we had a mass inflation in locum services, and locum agencies were walking away with £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 per shift per doctor just to cover GP surgeries.
Rebecca Butler, hold that thought one moment, Rebecca. I am going to bring you in after the break, but I do just want to go to Tony Wilson, and we will carry on this discussion after the break. We want to tap into your, obviously, knowledge as an NHS nurse, your experience of pay negotiations as a barrister and so on. But, Tony, I've asked you onto this discussion, not because you're in particular a health specialist, though, of course, you do have knowledge. You're a labour market specialist. You're an employment specialist. And I wanted to get your sense of putting this potential industrial action by doctors following industrial action just mooted by post office workers, obviously rail workers, barristers, teachers are making noises. I wanted you to put that in historic context. There's a lot of talk about a winter of discontent, a summer of discontent. There's a lot of talk about the 1970s. How would you characterise the current increasing trend of industrial action, Tony Wilson, in a historic context?
Well, thanks for having me on, Liam. I think we're going to see a level of industrial action that we've not seen in decades, possibly a level we've not seen since the 1970s. But there are also important points of difference. One in particular is that there's kind of four main industries, I think, now where union density is high enough that you could see widespread disruption. And so it won't be as broad as we saw in the 1970s. But those are transport, as we've seen, health, education, and broadly public administration, so local government, and probably also I would expect the civil service as well. Will be balloting for action. But I'm also not sure that we'll see strike action across all those four industries. I think we will see, as we actually saw in the RMT dispute as well, we'll see some operators, for example, some workforces taking action short of a strike. Works to rule, overtime bans and so on. And I think that could be very disruptive, but it may not lead to the complete shutdown that I think we're fearing we may see in some industries. I think what's less likely is that we won't. I don't think we're going to see a sort of spillover from that action into other industries, although we may at some margins. But the one important point I make is what's driving higher pay now, particularly in the private sector, where pay is racing ahead in the private sector, is the really, really tight labour market that's been driven by really high turnover in work and by fewer people participating in the labour force. You know, this big fall in numbers of people in work or looking for work. And actually, I'd agree with the point Natalie made earlier. In many respects, that is the root of the challenge the government has with GPs too, is that doctors more broadly too, is that so many doctors are leaving and we're struggling to train enough and also to keep people in work. So the government is going to need to do more, I think. Otherwise, it will face a recruitment and retention crisis as well as potentially industrial action.